You woke up this morning and made dozens of choices. What to eat, whether to buy that thing you've been putting off, whether to take the bus or call a cab, whether to put money into savings or spend it today. You thought those were personal decisions, choices you made freely based on what you wanted. They were not. Every single one of those decisions was shaped by a system you did not design, did not choose, and were never properly taught to understand. A system that determines how much your time is worth, how expensive your food is, whether your job exists next year, and whether the money sitting in your account will buy the same things in 10 years that it buys today. That system is the economy, and the people who understand how it works use that knowledge to get richer every time it breaks. The people who do not understand it pay the price every time it does. Part 1. What economics actually is. Most people think economics is about money, charts going up and down, boring men in suits arguing on the news. That is not what economics is. Economics is the study of how human beings make decisions when they cannot have everything they want. Because the central problem of economics is not poverty, it is scarcity. There is never enough of everything for everyone. Not enough oil, not enough time, not enough hospital beds, not enough houses in the right city. Economics is the study of how societies decide who gets what. That one sentence should disturb you, because the answer to that question, who gets what, is not natural. It is not inevitable. It is a choice, and for most of human history it has been a choice made by a very small number of people, in ways that served their interests, while everyone else was told it was just how things work. Here is the framework. Every economy in the world is trying to answer 3 questions. What to produce? The world has limited resources: labor, land, raw materials, energy. Every society must decide what to make with them. Guns or butter? As economists say, hospitals or fighter jets, housing or office blocks. How to produce it? Who does the work? What technology is used? Who owns the means of production? The factories, the software, the infrastructure. For whom to produce it? Who gets the output? The person who made it? The person who owns the company that made it? The person with the most money? The person with the greatest need? Different economic systems give radically different answers to these 3 questions, and the system you are born into shapes everything about your life, from your chances of survival at birth to your odds of dying in poverty at the end. Part 2. How markets work, and how they are supposed to. In 1776, a Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith published a book called The Wealth of Nations. It became the foundation of modern economics, and one of the most influential and most selectively quoted books ever written. Smith's central insight was this: when individuals pursue their own self-interest in a free market, buying and selling, competing for customers, trying to make a profit, the result, as if guided by an invisible hand, is that society as a whole benefits. Prices find their natural level, resources flow to where they are most valued. Everyone does better than they would if a central authority tried to plan it all. This is the logic of capitalism, and it is, in many circumstances, remarkably effective. Supply and demand is the engine. When a product is scarce and people want it, prices rise. High prices attract more producers. Profit is the incentive. More supply enters the market. Prices fall. Equilibrium is reached. When nobody wants something, prices fall. Producers stop making it. Resources shift elsewhere. The market self-corrects without anyone telling it to. It is why market economies have generated more material wealth than any other system in history. But here is what they leave out when they teach you this in school. Adam Smith also wrote extensively about the dangers of monopolies, the tendency of businessmen to collude against consumers, and the critical role of government in preventing markets from being captured by the powerful. He was not the pure free market prophet that modern economists pretend he was. And markets fail, constantly, in predictable ways. They fail when one company dominates an entire sector and can charge whatever it likes. They fail when the costs of production, pollution, health damage, community destruction, are pushed onto the public rather than paid by the producer. They fail when information is unequal, when the person selling knows far more than the person buying. They fail when the product being sold is something people cannot choose to go without: insulin, water, housing in the only city where the jobs are. A free market is a powerful tool. Like all powerful tools, it causes serious damage when used incorrectly or by people who know how to manipulate it. Part 3. Money, what it actually is. Here's something almost nobody is taught. Money is not real. Not in the way you think. There is no gold sitting in a vault somewhere backing the notes in your wallet. The British pound is not redeemable for anything. The US dollar has not been backed by gold since 1971, when President Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system in what was essentially a unilateral decision to detach the world's reserve currency from any physical constraint. Modern money is fiat currency. It has value because governments declare it has value, because courts enforce it as legal tender, and because everyone agrees to act as if it is real. The moment people stop believing in it, it becomes paper. This has happened. In Weimar Germany in 1923, hyperinflation made the currency so worthless that people used banknotes as wallpaper. In Zimbabwe in 2008, inflation reached 89.7 sextillion% per month. In Venezuela in 2018, prices doubled every 19 days. But here's the part that should truly unsettle you. Most of the money in existence was not printed by a government. It was created by banks. When a bank gives you a mortgage, it does not lend you money it has stored somewhere. It types a number into a computer. That number, your debt, becomes new money. It enters the economy. The bank has created it from nothing, and you will spend the next 25 years working to pay it back, plus interest. In the UK, over 97% of all money in circulation was created this way, as debt by commercial banks, for profit. The economy does not run on money, it runs on debt. And debt, by definition, means someone somewhere is always paying interest. The question is who pays and who collects. Part 4. Inflation and interest rates, the invisible tax. Inflation is the most misunderstood force in everyday economics. Most people think inflation means prices go up. That is true but incomplete. Inflation means the purchasing power of your money goes down. The pound in your pocket today will buy less next year, and the year after that, and every year of your life, unless your income rises faster than inflation, or are getting poorer even if your salary stays the same. Governments and central banks, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve in America, the European Central Bank, target roughly 2% inflation per year, not 0, 2%, meaning they are deliberately, systematically eroding the value of the money you hold. Why? Because inflation is good for debtors, including governments, which are the largest debtors in most economies. If you borrow £1 billion today, and inflation runs at 2% per year, the real value of what you owe shrinks every year. Your debt becomes cheaper to repay over time. Inflation is terrible for savers. The money sitting in your account loses value every single year, which is why wealthy people do not hold cash. They hold assets, property, stocks, businesses, whose prices tend to rise with inflation or faster. Inflation quietly transfers wealth from people who have cash to people who have assets, every year, without anyone voting for it. Interest rates are the main tool used to control inflation. When inflation rises, central banks raise interest rates. Borrowing becomes more expensive. People take out fewer loans. Businesses invest less. People spend less. The economy slows. Inflation falls. When the economy slows too much, they cut rates. Borrowing becomes cheap. People spend. Businesses expand. The economy heats up again. This sounds like a sensible control system. It is, roughly. But here is the problem. When interest rates rise, mortgage repayments rise. Millions of ordinary people who borrowed money to own a home suddenly find their monthly costs increasing by hundreds of pounds, not because they did anything wrong, but because a committee of unelected economists decided to slow the economy down. The pain of fighting inflation is not distributed equally. It lands heaviest on the people who borrowed the most because they had the least. Part 5. GDP, the number that runs the world. Gross domestic product, GDP. It is the single most powerful number in modern economics. Politicians live and die by it. Central banks obsess over it. The media reports it quarterly, as if it is a verdict on the nation's worth. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in a year. When it grows, we call it a good economy. When it shrinks for 2 consecutive quarters, we call it a recession, which triggers job cuts, spending freezes, and panic. Here's what GDP does not measure. It does not measure whether people are happy. It does not measure health. It does not measure the quality of the air or the water. It does not measure whether children are educated, or whether communities are connected, or whether people trust each other. GDP goes up when there's a car crash, because of the medical bills, the repair costs, the legal fees. GDP goes up when people get divorced, because of the lawyers, the second household, the therapy. GDP goes up when forests are cut down and sold as timber. The destruction of natural wealth counts as growth. It also does not count things that are genuinely valuable. Parents raising children, people caring for elderly relatives, volunteers building communities, neighbors helping neighbors. None of that appears in GDP. It only counts what is bought and sold. Simon Kuznets, the economist who invented GDP in the 1930s, explicitly warned that it should never be used as a measure of a nation's welfare. Politicians used it as a measure of a nation's welfare immediately and have never stopped. We optimize the economy for a number that was never designed to measure what matters. And then we wonder why the economy keeps growing while people keep feeling worse. How the gap gets bigger. In 2024, Oxfam reported that the 5 richest men in the world had doubled their wealth since 2020. During the same period, the combined wealth of nearly 5 billion people, the bottom 60% of humanity, had fallen. This is not an accident, it is a feature. The French economist Thomas Piketty spent decades compiling data on wealth and income across countries and centuries. His central finding was expressed as a simple formula. R is greater than G. R is the return on capital, the rate at which investments, property, and financial assets grow. G is the rate of economic growth, how fast the overall economy expands. When the return on capital exceeds economic growth, which is the normal condition in a developed economy, wealth concentrates. People who own assets get richer faster than people who work for wages can ever catch up, not because they work harder, because money makes money faster than labor does. This is why the gap between rich and poor has widened in almost every developed country over the past 4 decades. Not because of laziness or bad choices, because of mathematics. But here is the part that makes it a choice, not an inevitability. In the decades after World War II, inequality fell sharply across the Western world. Tax rates on the highest earners were dramatically higher, over 90% in the United States at points in the 1950s. Unions were strong. Public investment in housing, healthcare, and education was massive. The mechanisms existed to counteract the natural tendency of capital to concentrate. Then, in the late 1970s and 80s, a new economic consensus emerged. Led by Margaret Thatcher in Britain and Ronald Reagan in America, governments cut top tax rates, weakened unions, privatized public assets, and deregulated financial markets. The rich getting richer would lift all boats. The rich got richer, the boats of the rest did not rise proportionally. The inequality gap is now wider in many countries than it was before the Second World War. Economic distribution is a political choice, not a natural law. And someone is always making that choice, whether or not you are paying attention. Part 7. Recessions and crashes. Why they keep happening. In 2008, the global financial system came within hours of complete collapse. Not because of a natural disaster, not because of a war, because of mortgages. American banks had spent years lending money to people who could not afford to repay it. They then packaged those bad loans into complex financial products, gave them reassuring names, had them rated as safe by agencies being paid by the banks to rate them, and sold them to investors around the world. The entire financial system was built on the assumption that U.S. house prices would never fall. They fell. Within months, banks that had existed for over a century collapsed overnight. Credit markets froze. Businesses could not borrow to make payroll. Unemployment surged. Millions of ordinary people lost their homes, their jobs, and their savings because of decisions made by bankers they had never met, in products they could not understand, regulated by governments that had been told regulation was the enemy of growth. What happened to the bankers who caused it?
The U.S. government spent approximately $700 billion bailing out the financial institutions that had created the crisis.
The executives received bonuses. Virtually nobody went to prison. The people who lost their homes got nothing. This is not a conspiracy. It is a pattern. Banks privatize their gains and socialize their losses. They can do this because they are large enough that governments cannot allow them to fail. Too big to fail, which means they operate with an implicit government guarantee. that encourages exactly the reckless behavior that causes the crashes in the first place. Part 8. Globalization, the trade that nobody voted for. Since the 1980s, the world economy has become increasingly integrated. Goods made in China fill shops in Manchester. Call centers in India handle complaints from customers in Ohio. Financial crises in America destroy savings in Iceland. A pandemic in Wuhan shuts factories in Stuttgart. It has lifted over 1 billion people out of extreme poverty, mostly in Asia, in the space of a few decades. By the raw measure of human welfare, it is one of the most significant economic developments in history. But here is what the people selling globalization did not tell the workers in Birmingham, Detroit, or Lyon. When a factory moves to a country where wages are lower, the company profits. The consumers in the rich country get cheaper goods. The workers in the poor country get jobs. But the workers in the rich country who had those jobs, they get nothing. No transition support, no retraining, no replacement industry. Just the news that the plant is closing. The gains were real. They were also distributed in a way that left entire regions behind and created political rage that is still reshaping democracies today. Brexit, the rise of nationalist parties across Europe, political upheaval in America, all partly a direct consequence of economic displacement that mainstream economists dismissed for 30 years as the acceptable cost of progress. When economists say free trade creates winners and losers, but the gains outweigh the losses, what they often mean is, people like us gained, and people unlike us lost, and on balance, the spreadsheet looks fine. The spreadsheet is not the whole story. The people in the derelict town are also the story. Here is what all of this means for you, specifically, right now. The price of your rent is not a natural phenomenon. It is the result of decades of planning decisions, land ownership laws, and housing policy choices that made it illegal to build enough homes in the places people want to live. Someone made those choices. They mostly own property. The interest rate on your student loan is not a neutral financial mechanism. It is a policy choice about who should pay for higher education. In the decades when universities were free in Britain, the people who benefited most, the professionals and executives of today, paid nothing. Now their children pay tens of thousands. Your wages have not kept pace with productivity for 4 decades in most Western countries. Workers are producing more per hour than at any point in history. The gains have gone almost entirely to capital, to shareholders, to executives, to asset owners, not to the people doing the work. None of this is fate. None of it is gravity. All of it is policy. All of it can be changed. The most powerful thing economics education can give you is not the ability to read a balance sheet. It is the ability to recognize that economic outcomes are political choices, and to refuse to be told that what benefits the powerful is simply the natural order of things. Conclusion. You started this video being controlled by an economy you did not understand. You still are. That has not changed in 20 minutes. But here's what has changed. You now know that money is debt, that inflation is a policy, that GDP measures activity, not well-being, that markets are tools, not truths, that crashes are predictable, and the consequences are always paid by the same people, that the gap between rich and poor is not natural. It is a choice made and remade every year in tax codes, planning laws, labor regulations, and financial rules written mostly by people who own assets. The economy is not something that happens to you. It is something that is run by people, for purposes, and the less you understand it, the better it works for them. Now you understand it. That is all of economics in 20 minutes.